She sold everything to save her bankrupt billionaire husband, but one night she found him with her maid of honor. What she did next, no one could imagine. Was it a tough reunion or great revenge? Stay with your brother, Mr. Peter, till the end. Hi, my beautiful family. I am Mr. Peter, present with you today with love in my heart. Heavenly Father, I bow before you in gratitude. Thank you for the gift of women in this family, my sisters, my mothers, my daughters. They are the backbone of love, the carriers of peace, and the silent warriors who give everything yet ask for nothing. Lord, bless them with strength, with long life, with unshakable joy. Protect their hearts, ease their burdens, and let them feel how deeply they are honored. Without them there is no home, no light, no family. Today, I lift every woman here to you, asking you to crown them with dignity and wrap them in endless love. And my beloved family, I must share my heart. From the beginning, I built this channel not just for stories, but for us to stand together as one. Every view, every listen, every moment you give means my hard work is alive and not in vain. I know some who come here for the first time may struggle with trust, but remember, I am here, I am real, and my love for you is true. As long as I live, I promise this: my women family will always be honored, respected, and loved at the highest level. If your heart is true, right present. If your love is real, right, I am with Mr. Peter. Destiny has a wicked sense of humor, choosing to strike when a woman least expects her world to shatter and rebuild itself in a single heartbeat. Solace Raven moved through the Metropolitan Museum's grand ballroom like poetry in motion, her emerald silk gown catching light from 1,000 crystal teardrops suspended from the magnificent chandelier above. Her fingers traced the diamond necklace at her throat, a family heirloom that had witnessed generations of love stories as she surveyed the charity gala representing months of her meticulous planning. The orchid arrangements need adjustment on the east wall, she whispered into her pearl-encrusted headset, her voice carrying quiet authority that had made her Manhattan's most coveted event coordinator. Beauty demands perfection, and tonight we give these children nothing less. The Children's Hospital Charity Gala had drawn 500 of New York's most influential citizens, each diamond and silk creation representing hope for little souls fighting battles far too large for their tender hearts. Solace had poured her entire being into this evening, knowing every detail could mean the difference between life-saving equipment and empty promises. She paused beside the auction display, her heart swelling as she admired the centerpiece, a breathtaking painting of children playing in a sunlit garden. The artist had captured something ineffable about childhood innocence, and Solace found herself lost in the brushstrokes that seemed to dance with their own inner light. The piece reminded her why she had chosen event coordination over more lucrative careers. Every successful gala meant hope for families facing unimaginable challenges. The ballroom itself had been transformed into something that existed between dreams and reality. Ivory roses cascaded from towering arrangements that reached toward the museum's vaulted ceiling, their petals scattered like snow across marble floors that reflected candlelight in patterns resembling fallen stars. The scent of gardenias and white jasmine created an atmosphere so romantic that even the most cynical society matrons found themselves remembering their own wedding days with unexpected tenderness. "Excuse me, I'm terribly sorry." The deep, velvet voice made her turn just as warm champagne splashed across her gown, the golden liquid seeping into the emerald silk like liquid starlight. Time suspended itself as Solace looked up into eyes the color of stormy seas, framed by a face that belonged in Renaissance sculptures rather than modern ballrooms. Thatcher Savage stood before her, his powerful frame filling his perfectly tailored tuxedo, but it was the genuine mortification in his expression that caught her attention. This wasn't the arrogant billionaire she'd heard whispered about in society circles. This was a man genuinely horrified by his clumsiness. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as though he'd been running his hands through it with nervous energy, and she noticed a small scar near his left temple that somehow made him seem more human than the polished magazine photographs suggested. "Please, let me," he began, pulling an immaculate handkerchief from his jacket pocket, his movements careful and reverent as he approached the stain. "It's perfectly fine," Solace said softly, though her pulse quickened as his fingers brushed hers while dabbing at the champagne. "Silk forgives what hearts sometimes cannot." Thatcher's hand stilled, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Up close, she could see flecks of gold in his storm-grey eyes, could smell his cologne, something expensive but not overpowering, with hints of cedar and bergamot that reminded her of libraries and leather-bound books. "You're remarkably gracious for someone whose evening I've just ruined," he said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of vulnerability that surprised them both. "You haven't ruined anything, Mr. Savage." She'd recognized him the moment their eyes met. His photograph had graced countless magazine covers, though none had captured the warmth she saw flickering in their depths. "Though I confess I'm surprised to see Manhattan's most eligible bachelor at a children's charity event." A shadow crossed his features, vulnerability replacing the confidence she'd expected. "Children's causes hold special meaning for those who understand what it means to be alone in the world." The admission hung between them, like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Solace found herself studying this enigma of a man, wealthy beyond measure yet speaking of loneliness with a familiarity that touched something deep within her soul. "The painting you were admiring," Thatcher continued, gesturing toward the auction display, "it's remarkable how the artist captured joy in such simple brushstrokes. Children possess an innate understanding of happiness that we adults spend lifetimes trying to recapture," Solace replied, surprised by her own candor. "I believe that's why their healing matters so much. They remind us what pure hope looks like." Thatcher's expression transformed, the society mask slipping away to reveal something raw and beautiful beneath. "I've never heard anyone speak about charity work with such passion. Most people attend these events for the networking opportunities. And why are you here, Mr. Savage? To meet someone exactly like you, though I never dared believe such a person existed." The words tumbled from his lips with startling honesty, causing a blush to bloom across Solace's cheeks. The orchestra began playing a haunting waltz, Chopin's Minute Waltz transformed into something slower, more romantic, and couples drifted toward the dance floor like flowers drawn to sunlight. Thatcher extended his hand with the grace of a man born to command attention, but there was something almost shy in his gesture, as though he expected rejection despite his obvious wealth and status. "Would you honor me with a dance, mysterious lady in emerald?" Solace hesitated, her practical mind warning her about the dangerous territory she was entering. Thatcher Savage's reputation preceded him, brilliant businessman, confirmed bachelor, heartbreaker extraordinaire. Yet something in his eyes whispered of depths unexplored, of a man yearning for connection beyond the shallow waters of society expectations. She had attended enough charity galas to recognize the type of man who usually approached her. Silver-haired philanthropists, seeking younger companions for their golden years, ambitious executives who saw event coordinators as useful networking contacts, or worse, married men whose wives were conveniently occupied elsewhere. But Thatcher seemed different, genuinely nervous despite his obvious advantages. "One dance," she conceded, placing her hand in his. The moment their fingers intertwined, electricity sparked between them with such intensity that Solace wondered if others could see the invisible flames dancing in the air around them. Thatcher led her onto the marble floor, with movements that spoke of expensive lessons and natural rhythm. but it was the way he held her, as if she were made of precious crystal, that made her heart skip. The ballroom faded around them until nothing existed except the music and the magnetic pull, drawing them closer with each step. Other couples swirled past in blurs of color and movement, but Solace felt as though she and Thatcher occupied their own private universe, where time moved differently and possibilities hung in the air like promises waiting to be fulfilled. "You realize I still don't know your name," he murmured against her ear as they swayed to the music, his breath sending shivers down her spine. "Solace," she whispered, the word carrying more weight than a simple introduction. "Solace, Raven. Solace." He repeated her name like a prayer, his voice wrapping around each syllable with reverence. "It suits you perfectly. You emanate a peace I've never encountered before." As they danced, Solace found herself discovering facets of this man that contradicted everything she'd heard about Manhattan's most notorious bachelor. He listened more than he spoke, asked thoughtful questions about her work and dreams, and seemed genuinely interested in her responses, rather than simply waiting for his turn to talk. "I've attended hundreds of these events," Thatcher confessed as the song drew to a close, "but I've never met someone who makes me forget why I usually avoid them." "And why do you avoid them?" Solace asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Because they're filled with people who see dollar signs when they look at me, not a man searching for something real in a world of beautiful facades." The honesty in his admission took her breath away. Here stood one of the world's most powerful men, yet he spoke with the vulnerability of someone who had learned that money couldn't purchase the things that mattered most. When the auction began, Solace watched in amazement as Thatcher bid $50,000 on the children's garden painting, not for the prestige, but because he'd noticed her admiration for it earlier. "Why?" she asked as applause erupted around them. "Because when you looked at that painting, your entire face lit up with wonder. I wanted to see that expression again." As the evening wound to its close and guests began departing into the star-studded night, Thatcher walked Solace to the museum's grand entrance. The autumn air carried hints of change, and she pulled her silk wrap closer around her shoulders. "Have dinner with me," he said suddenly, the words carrying an urgency that surprised them both. Solace studied his face, seeing past the wealth and reputation to the man beneath. Someone who had touched her soul in ways she hadn't thought possible during a single evening. "One dinner won't change my life," she said finally, the words carrying a prophecy neither of them yet understood. How magnificently wrong she would prove to be. Chapter 2. Dancing in the Rain. Sometimes the universe conspires to teach us that the most beautiful moments bloom from the most unexpected storms. The rooftop restaurant overlooked Manhattan's glittering skyline like a jeweled crown. But Solace found herself far more captivated by the man sitting across from her than by the breathtaking view spreading beneath the star-studded heavens. Thatcher had surprised her by choosing intimacy over extravagance, this hidden gem where conversation mattered more than being seen. "Tell me about your dreams," Thatcher said, his hand moving gently around the rim of his wineglass as candlelight danced across his features. "Not your career ambitions or society expectations, your real dreams, the ones you whisper to the stars when no one else is listening." Solace felt her breath catch at the unexpected depth of his question. Men in her world typically asked about her work, her family connections, or her availability for future social events. None had ever inquired about the secret longings she carried in the quietest chambers of her heart. "I want to open an art therapy center for children," she admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "A place where young souls can heal through creativity, where broken spirits can discover they're actually artists waiting to bloom." Thatcher leaned forward, genuine interest lighting his features like dawn breaking over troubled waters. "What inspired such a beautiful vision?" "I spent time in hospitals as a child," Solace confessed, her voice growing soft with memory. Not as a patient, but visiting my younger cousin who battled illness for so long. I watched how drawing and painting gave him strength when medicine couldn't touch his spirit. He taught me that healing happens in colors and brushstrokes as much as in surgery and pills. "Where is your cousin now?" Thatcher asked gently. "Dancing among the angels," Solace whispered, tears threatening to spill. "But his legacy lives in every child I hope to help find their artistic voice." Thatcher reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the simple gesture carrying more comfort than 1,000 empty consolations. "Your dream isn't just beautiful, Solace. It's necessary. This world needs more people who understand that healing comes in many forms." "And what about your dreams?" she asked, turning her palm upward so their fingers could intertwine. "Beyond building business empires and accumulating wealth, what makes Thatcher Savage's soul sing?" A shadow crossed his features, vulnerability replacing the confident facade she was beginning to recognize as carefully constructed armor. "I dream of creating something that matters beyond profit margins, of building a legacy that helps rather than simply accumulates, of finding someone who sees the man rather than the bank account." "Money doesn't define a person's worth," Solace said softly, "though I imagine it makes relationships complicated when you can never be certain of people's motivations." "Precisely." His thumb traced gentle circles across her knuckles. "I've learned to recognize the signs, women who research my net worth before our first date, friends whose enthusiasm corresponds directly to my latest stock performance, family members who only call when they need financial assistance." "That sounds incredibly lonely," Solace observed, her heart aching for the isolation she heard beneath his words. "It was," Thatcher admitted, "until tonight, until I met a woman who looked at a painting and saw hope for children she'd never met, who turned a spilled champagne disaster into conversation, who dreams of healing the world one young artist at a time." Thunder rumbled overhead like nature's percussion section, and the first fat raindrops began spattering against the restaurant's glass walls. Other diners hurried inside, but Solace found herself drawn to the windows, watching the storm transform the city into something magical and wild. "We should go inside," Thatcher suggested, as lightning illuminated the sky in brilliant white flames. "Or we could stay here and watch the world wash itself clean," Solace countered, surprising herself with her spontaneous suggestion. Thatcher studied her face, seeing something that made him smile with genuine delight. "You're not like other women I've known." "How so?" "Most would be horrified at the thought of their hair getting wet or their dress being ruined. You look at the storm like it's a gift." Before Solace could respond, the heavens opened with dramatic flair, sending torrents of rain cascading across the rooftop in silver sheets. The restaurant staff scrambled to move furniture and escort guests inside, but Solace remained mesmerized by nature's spectacular display. "Dance with me," Thatcher said suddenly, standing and extending his hand with the same gallant gesture he'd offered at the charity gala. "In the rain?" Solace laughed, her eyes sparkling with delight at his unexpected proposition. "Especially in the rain. When will we ever have such a perfect moment again?" Without hesitation, Solace placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her into the storm. The rain soaked through her silk dress within seconds, plastering her hair against her face and transforming her elegant appearance into something wild and beautiful. But as Thatcher's arms encircled her waist and they began swaying to music only they could hear, Solace realized she had never felt more alive. "You're magnificent," Thatcher murmured against her ear, his voice barely audible above the storm's symphony. "Absolutely magnificent." "I must look like a drowned cat," Solace laughed, but she made no move to escape his embrace. "You look like a goddess celebrating life itself." His hands framed her face with infinite tenderness, thumbs brushing raindrops from her cheeks like precious pearls. I've never met anyone who embraces the unexpected with such joy." As lightning illuminated their faces, Thatcher leaned down and captured her lips in a kiss that tasted of rain and possibility. Solace had been kissed before, but never like this, never with such reverence, such promise, such perfect recognition of two souls finding their match in the midst of a storm. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and soaked to the skin, Solace realized that something fundamental had shifted in her world. This wasn't just attraction or infatuation. This was the kind of connection that poets wrote sonnets about, the kind of love that made ordinary people capable of extraordinary things. "I should get you home before you catch pneumonia," Thatcher said reluctantly, though his arms remained securely around her waist. "Probably wise," Solace agreed, though she made no effort to step away from his warmth. Over the following days, their courtship unfolded like a beautiful symphony, each encounter adding new layers to their growing connection. Thatcher took her to art galleries where they spent hours discussing the stories hidden within brushstrokes and sculptures. They walked through Central Park, feeding ducks and sharing childhood memories on park benches worn smooth by countless other love stories. Unlike the flashy displays of wealth she might have expected, Thatcher seemed determined to show her his heart rather than his portfolio. He listened when she spoke about her work, asked thoughtful questions about her family, and shared stories of his own childhood loneliness with a vulnerability that touched her soul. "I've never had anyone take such genuine interest in my thoughts," Solace confessed during one of their quiet dinners at a small Italian restaurant tucked away from the society scene. "I find everything about you fascinating," Thatcher replied. "The way you tilt your head when you're thinking deeply, how your eyes light up when you talk about helping children, the fact that you choose substance over surface every single time. And I love how you notice details that other people overlook," Solace responded. "You see the world through an artist's eyes, even though you've spent your life building business empires." When Hope Langley, Solace's protective sister, voiced concerns about Thatcher's reputation, Solace found herself defending him with passionate conviction. "He's different than what people say," Solace insisted during lunch at their favorite cafe. "He's thoughtful and kind and genuinely interested in making the world better." "Just be careful," Hope warned, her eyes reflecting sisterly concern. "Rich men can be very charming when they want something." But Bardo Elsher, Solace's dearest friend since childhood, offered enthusiastic encouragement. "He's perfect for you," Bardo declared, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I've never seen you so happy, so alive. He brings out a radiance in you that's absolutely breathtaking." As their relationship deepened, Solace discovered layers of complexity in Thatcher that contradicted every preconception about wealthy playboys. He donated anonymously to numerous charities, maintained genuine friendships with people from all walks of life, and treated service staff with the same respect he showed business associates. The evening that would forever change her world began with Thatcher's nervous energy, his usual confidence replaced by endearing uncertainty. "I have a surprise for you," he said, leading her to a wing of the children's hospital that had been closed for renovations. When he opened the doors, Solace gasped in wonder. The space had been transformed into a beautiful art therapy center, complete with natural lighting, child-sized easels, and walls designed for displaying young masterpieces. "This is your dream," Thatcher said softly. "I wanted to help make it reality." Tears of joy streamed down Solace's face as she realized the magnitude of his gift. This wasn't just expensive renovation, this was understanding, support, and belief in her vision made manifest. "How did you—" she began, but words failed her. "I listened," Thatcher said simply. "And I realized that supporting your dreams might be the most important thing I ever accomplish." Standing in that beautiful space, surrounded by the promise of healing and hope, Solace understood that she had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with a man whose heart proved far more valuable than his fortune. Chapter 3. Promises in Paradise. Paradise isn't a place on any map. It's the moment when two hearts recognize they were created to beat in perfect harmony. The private jet descended through cotton candy clouds toward an emerald island that seemed painted by angels themselves, but Solace felt nervous butterflies dancing in her stomach as she gazed through the oval window. Thatcher's invitation to his Caribbean retreat had surprised her with its sudden intimacy, and she found herself questioning whether she was ready for whatever this tropical sanctuary might reveal about their deepening relationship. "Having second thoughts?" Thatcher asked softly, his perceptive eyes catching the uncertainty she thought she'd hidden beneath her composed exterior. "Not about you," Solace admitted, her fingers nervously adjusting the flowing white sundress she'd chosen for travel. "But this feels like crossing a threshold we can't uncross." Thatcher reached over and intertwined their fingers with the tender reverence that had become his signature gesture. "We'll cross only the thresholds you choose, Solace. This island is about giving us space to discover who we are together, away from society's expectations and prying eyes." As the plane touched down on a runway carved into tropical perfection, Solace felt her reservations begin dissolving like sugar in warm tea. The island wasn't the ostentatious display of wealth she might have expected. Instead, it felt like stepping into a natural cathedral where luxury served beauty rather than ego. The villa that would be their sanctuary perched on a cliff overlooking crystalline waters that shifted from turquoise to sapphire as clouds painted shadows across the surface. Bougainvillea cascaded over natural stone walls like living jewels, and the sound of waves provided nature's own symphony of serenity. Exotic birds created flashes of brilliant color against emerald foliage, their songs weaving melodies that seemed composed specifically for lovers discovering paradise together. "It's breathtaking," Solace breathed, stepping onto the terrace where hummingbirds darted between flowering vines like tiny rainbow jewels. "I hoped you'd find it peaceful," Thatcher said, though she caught the nervous undertone in his voice. "I've never brought anyone here before. This place has always been my refuge from the world's demands." The admission touched something deep within Solace's heart. This island represented Thatcher's most private sanctuary, and by bringing her here, he was sharing the vulnerable spaces of his soul that no fortune could purchase or society could penetrate. Their first evening unfolded like poetry written in candlelight and ocean breeze. Dinner appeared on the terrace as if by magic. Fresh seafood prepared by an invisible chef. Tropical flowers adorning a table set for two beneath a canopy of stars that seemed close enough to pluck from the velvet sky. The warm trade winds carried the intoxicating perfume of frangipani and jasmine, creating an atmosphere so romantic it felt almost surreal. "Tell me about your childhood," Solace requested, as they savored grilled lobster with mango salsa, the ocean providing percussion for their intimate conversation. Thatcher's expression grew contemplative as he gazed across the moonlit waters. "Lonely, mostly. My parents viewed me as their heir rather than their child, someone to be groomed for success rather than cherished for simply existing. Boarding schools, summer business camps, dinners where the conversation centered on stock portfolios rather than dreams or fears." "That explains so much about you," Solace said gently, her heart aching for the boy who had been forced to become a businessman before learning to be a man. "How so?" "The way you notice details about people, how you listen so intently when others speak, your genuine surprise when someone shows interest in your thoughts rather than your wealth. You're still that little boy hoping someone will see him for who he is rather than what he possesses." Thatcher's eyes grew luminous with unshed tears. "You see me more clearly than I see myself sometimes." "Because I love what I see," Solace whispered, the words escaping before she could consider their weight. The silence that followed stretched between them like a bridge neither had expected to build so soon, but the truth hung in the tropical air with the sweetness of frangipani and the power of lightning about to strike. "I love you too," Thatcher said finally, his voice carrying wonder, as if he'd discovered a new continent within his own heart. "I've never said those words before, and meant them completely." They made love that night with the tenderness of souls recognizing their perfect match, the ocean's rhythm providing the soundtrack for their physical and emotional communion. Solace had known passion before, but never this profound sense of completeness, never this feeling that she'd found the other half of herself in someone else's embrace. The villa's master bedroom, with its flowing white curtains and panoramic view of the moonlit sea, became their private world where nothing existed beyond their whispered promises and intertwined hearts. Over the following days, their connection deepened like roots finding rich soil. They swam in hidden lagoons where tropical fish painted the water with living rainbows, the coral formations creating underwater gardens that rivaled anything human hands could design. They explored secluded beaches where their footprints in pristine sand marked the first steps of their journey toward forever, collecting shells that would become treasured memories of these perfect days. The island's natural wonders provided endless opportunities for discovery. They kayaked through mangrove tunnels where sunlight filtered through emerald canopies, creating cathedral-like spaces where only their whispered conversations disturbed the sacred silence. They hiked to hidden waterfalls where they bathed beneath cascading freshwater while rainbow mists created halos around their laughter. "I've been thinking about your art therapy center," Thatcher said one afternoon as they lounged in hammocks strung between coconut palms, the dappled sunlight creating patterns across their sun-warmed skin. "What about it?" Solace asked, turning to face him with curiosity. "What if we expanded the vision? What if we created a network of centers, places where children from all backgrounds could discover healing through creativity? We could build something that changes thousands of lives rather than just dozens." Solace felt her pulse quicken with excitement at the possibilities his suggestion opened. That would require enormous funding, careful planning, trained staff. All manageable obstacles when you have the right vision and the right partner. Thatcher's eyes held depths of possibility that took her breath away. "I've spent so long accumulating wealth without understanding its true purpose. Maybe I was meant to use it to make your dreams bigger than you ever dared imagine." "You would do that?" Solace asked, though she already knew the answer in her heart. "I would do anything to see that light in your eyes every day for the rest of my life." Their conversations during these magical days revealed layers of compatibility that went beyond physical attraction or shared interests. They discovered they both loved reading poetry under starlight. Both felt moved by classical music that seemed to speak directly to their souls. Both believed that true wealth lay in experiences shared rather than possessions accumulated. They talked about everything, childhood fears that had shaped their adult perspectives, dreams that seemed too audacious to voice aloud, hopes for a future that included not just personal happiness, but meaningful contribution to the world's healing. That evening, as they strolled along the beach where waves whispered ancient secrets to the shore, Thatcher stopped walking and turned to face her with an expression that made her heart skip several beats. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of coral and gold, creating a backdrop so beautiful it seemed designed by divine providence for this perfect moment. "Solace," he began, his voice carrying the weight of momentous words, "I need to tell you something that I've never shared with another living soul." She waited, sensing the importance of whatever revelation was coming. "I've been alone my entire life, even when surrounded by people. I've attended countless social gatherings where I was the guest of honor, yet felt completely isolated. I've had relationships that looked perfect from the outside but left me feeling emptier than before." He cupped her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. But with you, I've discovered what it means to truly be seen, truly be known, truly be loved for who I am rather than what I can provide. Tears of joy streamed down Solace's cheeks as she recognized the profound gift of his vulnerability. "You've given me something I never believed possible," Thatcher continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "You've given me a home in your heart, a purpose beyond profit, and a future worth building together." In one fluid motion, Thatcher dropped to one knee in the sand, pulling a velvet box from his pocket as waves crashed behind him like nature's applause for this perfect moment. "This ring belonged to my grandmother," he said, opening the box to reveal an exquisite emerald surrounded by diamonds that caught the moonlight like captured stars. "She was the only person who truly loved me unconditionally before I met you. She always said I should save it for a woman who would cherish the man rather than covet the fortune." Solace gasped at the ring's beauty. But more than that, she was moved by the legacy it represented. Love passed down through generations, waiting for the right moment to bloom again. "Solace Raven," Thatcher said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me where love matters more than wealth, where dreams become reality through partnership, where two souls become one heart beating for something larger than ourselves?" "Yes," Solace whispered, then louder with joy that could have powered the island's electricity. "Yes, yes, yes." As Thatcher slipped the emerald ring onto her finger, Solace realized that she had found something rarer than any precious stone. She had found a love that would transform them both into the best versions of themselves, a partnership that would create beauty in the world long after their own footprints in the sand had been washed away by time's inevitable tide. Chapter 4. Fairy Tale Wedding. Some moments in life deserve to be preserved in crystal and starlight, woven into eternity's fabric where true love stories live forever. The Metropolitan Museum had been transformed into something existing between dreams and reality, where ivory silk and cascading white roses created an altar worthy of the love story about to be consecrated within its hallowed walls. Solace stood before the antique mirror in the museum's private bridal suite, her reflection showing a woman who had discovered that fairy tales could indeed come true for those brave enough to believe in forever. Her wedding gown flowed like liquid moonlight, the vintage lace that had adorned her grandmother's shoulders now gracing her own in a beautiful continuation of family legacy. The emerald engagement ring caught the light from crystal chandeliers, but it was the radiant joy illuminating her features that truly made her breathtaking. "You look like an angel descended from heaven itself," Hope Langley whispered, her eyes misting with tears as she adjusted the cathedral train that would follow her sister down the aisle like a cloud of silk and dreams. "I feel like I'm about to step into the most beautiful chapter of my life," Solace replied, her voice trembling with anticipation and overwhelming gratitude for the miracle of finding her soulmate in a world that often seemed devoid of genuine connection. Bardo Elsher bustled around the bridal suite with the enthusiasm of someone living vicariously through her dearest friend's happiness, her own emerald silk gown, chosen to complement the bride's ring, making her look like a woodland fairy tasked with ensuring everything remained perfect for this magical celebration. "I still can't believe you're marrying Manhattan's most eligible bachelor," Bardo gushed, making final adjustments to Solace's veil. "When you walked into that charity gala, did you ever imagine you'd walk out with Prince Charming?" "I walked out with something far more precious than Prince Charming," Solace corrected gently. "I found my perfect match, my partner, my home." As the processional music began filtering through the museum's speakers like audible honey, Solace felt her heart expand with such pure joy that she wondered if it might simply float out of her chest and dance among the crystal teardrops of the chandeliers above. The great hall had been arranged to showcase both grandeur and intimacy, with 500 guests seated among arrangements of white peonies and ivory roses that seemed to glow with their own inner light. But as Solace began her walk down the flower-strewn aisle, the entire gathering faded into soft focus until only one person remained crystal clear. Thatcher, standing at the altar with tears of joy streaming down his face as he watched his bride approach. He looked magnificent in his custom-tailored morning coat, but it was the expression of wonder and devotion in his eyes that made Solace's breath catch in her throat. This powerful man who commanded boardrooms and influenced markets stood before God and witnesses looking as though he'd been granted a miracle he'd never dared request. When they joined hands at the altar, the world seemed to pause and hold its breath, recognizing that something sacred was taking place within these ancient walls, where countless love stories had been blessed and celebrated throughout the decades. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying the weight of ceremony and sanctity, "we gather today to witness the union of two hearts that have found their perfect complement in one another." The traditional words washed over the assembled guests, but Solace and Thatcher remained lost in each other's eyes, their connection so profound that the elegant ceremony became merely the beautiful backdrop for their private communion of souls. When the moment came for personal vows, Thatcher's voice trembled with emotion as he spoke words that came directly from his transformed heart. "Solace, before I met you, I thought I understood what it meant to be successful. I measured my worth in dollars and achievements, in recognition and power. But you taught me that true wealth lies in finding someone who sees your soul and loves what they discover there." His thumb traced gentle circles across her knuckles as tears of joy sparkled like diamonds on her cheeks. "You showed me that the greatest fortune isn't what a man accumulates, but what he's willing to share. I promise to treasure your heart above all earthly riches, to support your dreams as passionately as you've embraced mine, and to love you with every breath I draw until my last day on this earth." Solace's response came through happy tears that made her voice sound like silver bells touched by morning dew. "Thatcher, you've given me something I never knew I was searching for. A love that sees beyond surface beauty to the essence beneath, a partnership that makes us both stronger than we could ever be alone. I promise to stand beside you through prosperity and challenge, to celebrate your victories and comfort your defeats, to build our dreams together until we create something more beautiful than either of us could imagine individually. For richer or poorer, in joy and sorrow, I choose you today and always." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss tasted of promises kept and adventures yet to come, of a love story just beginning despite feeling as though it had been written in the stars since the dawn of time. The reception flowed like champagne and laughter, with toasts that honored not just the bride and groom, but the magic that had brought them together against all odds. Powers Hansley, Thatcher's business partner and closest friend, raised his glass with words that made the assembled guests smile with recognition of true love's power. "I've known Thatcher Savage for many years, and I've watched him conquer every challenge the business world could present. But I've never seen him conquered by anything until he met Solace. She didn't just win his heart, she transformed it, reminding us all that the most successful ventures are those that enrich the soul rather than merely the bank account." Hope Langley's maid of honor speech brought tears to many eyes as she spoke of watching her sister discover a love that honored both her independence and her capacity for partnership. Solace has always been someone who gives her whole heart to everything she believes in. Today, watching her marry Thatcher, I see that she's found someone worthy of that magnificent heart, someone who will cherish it as the treasure it truly is. But it was their first dance that truly captured the essence of their connection. As Etta James's "At Last" filled the museum's great hall, Solace and Thatcher moved together with the grace of two people who had found their rhythm in life as well as on the dance floor. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Savage?" Thatcher murmured against her ear as they swayed to music that seemed written specifically for their love story. "Like coming home to a place I never knew existed but was always meant to find," Solace replied, her heart so full of gratitude and joy that she felt it might simply overflow and bathe the entire reception in golden light. Their honeymoon in Tuscany unfolded like pages from a romance novel written by angels who understood that true love deserved settings worthy of its beauty. They awakened each morning in a villa overlooking rolling vineyards where the morning mist created landscapes that seemed painted by master artists who specialized in capturing heaven on earth. Afternoons were spent exploring medieval villages where cobblestone streets echoed with the footsteps of countless other lovers who had walked these paths through centuries of spring seasons and wedding celebrations. They sampled wines that had aged in underground cellars while their own love was still taking root, and they shared dinners on terraces where sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold that rivaled the blush on Solace's cheeks. "I've never been happier," Solace confessed one evening as they lay beneath Italian stars that seemed brighter and more numerous than any they'd ever seen before. "Neither have I," Thatcher replied, pulling her closer until she could feel his heartbeat steady and strong against her cheek. "I keep expecting to wake up and discover this has all been the most beautiful dream." "If it's a dream, then I never want to wake up," Solace whispered, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of wine and wonder and the absolute certainty that some love stories were indeed destined to last forever. Their return to Manhattan felt like beginning the next chapter of an epic adventure, their penthouse overlooking Central Park now transformed from a bachelor's luxurious apartment into a true home, where love lived in every carefully chosen detail and every room echoed with laughter and intimate conversation. Chapter 5. Cracks in Paradise. Even the most beautiful porcelain can develop hairline fractures that remain invisible until light hits them at precisely the wrong angle. Solace noticed the first subtle changes in Thatcher, like a musician detecting notes slightly off-key in a once-perfect symphony, small discordances that might escape casual listeners but struck her finely tuned heart with growing unease. The man who had once greeted her each evening with eyes lighting up like harbor beacons now often stared through her as though seeing problems existing in dimensions she couldn't access. "Darling, dinner is ready," she called from their dining room, where candles flickered beside the fresh orchids she arranged daily, hoping to maintain the romantic ambience that had once characterized every moment of their married life. "Give me 10 more minutes," Thatcher replied from his home office, his voice carrying the distracted tone that had become as familiar as it was concerning. "I need to finish reviewing these quarterly reports." 10 minutes stretched into 30, then an hour, until Solace found herself dining alone while her husband's silhouette remained hunched over his computer screen like a modern atlas carrying burdens too heavy for mortal shoulders. The elaborate meal she'd planned grew cold while she sat surrounded by the beautiful life they'd built together, feeling more isolated than she had during her single years. When Thatcher finally emerged from his office, exhaustion had carved new lines around his eyes and tension had settled in his shoulders like an unwelcome permanent resident. "I'm sorry," he said automatically, the apology as rehearsed as it was inadequate. "The markets have been unpredictable lately, and I need to stay on top of every development." "You've been saying that for weeks," Solace observed gently, rising to heat his neglected dinner. "Perhaps it's time to tell me what's really happening." "Nothing you need to worry about," Thatcher deflected, accepting the warmed plate with a gratitude that somehow felt more distant than appreciation should. "Business always has its challenges. This is just a particularly demanding period." But Solace's intuition, sharpened by deep love and careful observation, detected the tremor in his voice that suggested his troubles ran deeper than routine corporate stress. The man who had once shared his every thought and feeling with enthusiastic transparency had erected invisible barriers that seemed to grow higher with each passing conversation. Their art therapy center had officially opened to tremendous success, with children's laughter echoing through halls that Thatcher had funded with such generous enthusiasm. Yet when Solace tried to share stories of breakthrough moments and healing victories, she found herself speaking to a husband whose mind remained trapped in whatever private hell was consuming his thoughts. Today, little Emma painted her first picture since the accident. Solace shared over breakfast, hoping to recapture some of their former connection through discussion of the cause they both cherished. She's been silent for weeks, but something about mixing watercolors helped her find her voice again. "That's wonderful," Thatcher replied, but his eyes never left his smartphone screen, where messages arrived with the relentless urgency of digital thunderstorms. "Thatcher," Solace said firmly, her patience finally reaching its limit, "please look at me when I'm speaking to you." He glanced up with the guilty expression of a student caught daydreaming in class, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach his troubled eyes. "I'm sorry, darling, I'm listening." "No, you're not," Solace replied with the gentle honesty that had always characterized their relationship. "You're physically present, but emotionally you're somewhere else entirely. Where have you gone, and how do I find you again?" For a moment, vulnerability flickered across Thatcher's features like lightning illuminating storm clouds, and Solace glimpsed the frightened man hiding behind his successful facade. But just as quickly, the shutters slammed closed again. "I'm right here," he insisted, though they both knew it wasn't true. "I'm just dealing with some complicated business situations that require intense focus." "What kind of situations?" Solace pressed, recognizing that their marriage's foundation demanded complete honesty even when truth proved uncomfortable. "Market fluctuations, investment challenges, the usual corporate headaches," Thatcher replied with practiced vagueness. "Nothing that won't resolve itself with proper attention and strategic planning." But late that night, as Thatcher worked in his office with the desperate intensity of someone fighting an invisible war, Solace crept close enough to overhear fragments of hushed phone conversations that painted a far more alarming picture than his reassuring words had suggested. "We can't afford another quarter like this one," she heard him whisper into his phone, desperation making his voice sound foreign and frightened. "If the Patterson deal doesn't close, we're looking at catastrophic losses." Her heart clenched as she recognized the weight of genuine terror in her husband's voice, the sound of a man watching his world crumble despite his best efforts to hold everything together through sheer determination and denial. The following evening brought Powers Hansley to their penthouse for what was supposed to be a social dinner, but quickly devolved into an intense business conference that excluded Solace from her own dining room. She retreated to their bedroom, pretending to read, while actually straining to catch snippets of conversation that drifted through the walls like smoke from a distant fire. "The Singapore project was supposed to be our safety net." Power's voice carried stress that matched Thatcher's recent transformation. "Now it's become another liability we can't afford." "There has to be a solution," Thatcher replied with the stubborn determination of someone refusing to accept defeat. "We've weathered difficult periods before." "Not like this," Powers responded grimly. "This isn't a temporary downturn. This is systematic collapse across multiple sectors simultaneously." When Powers finally departed, leaving behind an atmosphere heavy with unspoken fears, Solace found Thatcher standing at their floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the glittering city lights as though searching for answers written in the urban constellation below. "Talk to me," she pleaded, approaching him with the careful tenderness reserved for wounded animals. "Please don't carry this burden alone." "I can handle it," Thatcher insisted, but his reflection in the window showed a man who looked anything but capable of handling whatever storms were battering his professional life. "We promised to share everything," Solace reminded him, her hand finding his shoulder where tension had knotted his muscles into painful sculptures. "For richer or poorer, remember?" At those words, Thatcher's carefully maintained composure finally cracked like ice, breaking under unbearable weight. His shoulders sagged, as though invisible chains had been dragging him toward some terrible precipice, and when he turned to face her, Solace saw fear naked in his eyes for the first time since they'd met. "The company is in serious trouble," he admitted, the words seeming to tear themselves from his throat like confessions extracted under torture. "We've made some catastrophic investment decisions, trusted the wrong advisors, expanded too aggressively into volatile markets." "How serious?" Solace asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would reshape their beautiful life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. "Serious enough that we might lose everything," Thatcher whispered, his voice breaking on the admission. "The penthouse, the island, the lifestyle you've grown accustomed to, all of it could disappear if I can't find a way to turn things around." Solace felt the ground shift beneath her feet, but not because of potential financial loss. What devastated her was realizing that her husband, the man who had shared his deepest vulnerabilities during their courtship, had been suffering alone for weeks while she remained oblivious to his pain. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her heart breaking not for their threatened fortune, but for the walls that had grown between them during his crisis. "Because I was supposed to protect you from this," Thatcher replied, shame coloring his voice. "Because I was supposed to be strong enough to fix everything before you ever had to worry." "That's not how marriage works," Solace said firmly, taking his hands in hers with the same determination she'd shown when accepting his proposal in the island sand. "We're partners, remember? Your problems are my problems, your fights are my fights." As they held each other in their endangered paradise, neither could imagine how much deeper into darkness their troubles would soon descend, or how severely their love would be tested by betrayals that would make financial ruin seem like a gentle inconvenience. Chapter 6. When Love Means Sacrifice. True love reveals itself not in the giving of gifts, but in the surrendering of treasures, when surrender becomes the only language speaking of devotion. The morning light streaming through their penthouse windows illuminated the antique jewelry box that had belonged to Solace's grandmother, its contents representing 4 generations of family history, preserved in precious metals and gemstones that had witnessed countless celebrations, sorrows, and sacred moments. Yet as Solace lifted each piece with reverent fingers, she felt no hesitation about what needed to be done. "You don't have to do this," Thatcher said quietly from the bedroom doorway, his voice heavy with shame and gratitude warring for dominance in his wounded heart. "These pieces mean everything to your family's legacy. Our marriage means more than any heirloom," Solace replied with serene determination, holding up the diamond necklace that had graced her grandmother's throat on her own wedding day decades earlier. "Family treasures are meant to preserve what matters most, and right now, what matters most is us." She had awakened before dawn, with crystalline clarity about her path forward, understanding that love required action rather than mere sentiment when crisis threatened to destroy everything they had built together. The financial catastrophe engulfing Thatcher's empire demanded immediate sacrifice from someone willing to place relationship above personal attachment. "These will bring enough to cover the most pressing mortgage payments," Solace calculated with the practical wisdom she had inherited from generations of strong women who had faced their own impossible choices with grace. "And I've made appointments with auction houses for the art collection this afternoon." Thatcher's reflection in her vanity mirror showed a man wrestling with emotions too complex for simple categorization. Pride warred with pragmatism, masculine provider instincts battled with desperate gratitude, and overwhelming love for his wife competed with crushing guilt over requiring her sacrifice. "I'll find other ways," he protested weakly, though they both knew his options had been exhausted through sleepless nights of financial engineering and increasingly desperate business maneuvers. "We'll find solutions together," Solace corrected firmly, turning to face him with eyes that blazed with unwavering commitment. That's what partnership means, sharing both the burdens and the solutions. Her systematic dismantling of their luxurious lifestyle began immediately and proceeded with military efficiency tempered by emotional wisdom. The priceless paintings that had transformed their penthouse into a private gallery found new homes with collectors who appreciated their beauty, though none would ever understand how each sale represented another small death of dreams deferred. The vintage wines Thatcher had collected during his bachelor years disappeared into the cellars of restaurants whose sommelier assured discretion regarding their provenance. Crystal stemware that had toasted their engagement became anonymous lots in estate sales, their romantic history erased by necessity's cruel mathematics. "I hate watching you sacrifice everything that brings you joy," Thatcher confessed one evening as Solace carefully wrapped the last of her grandmother's china in tissue paper with the tenderness of someone preparing beloved artifacts for burial. "You bring me joy," she replied simply, her fingers lingering on the delicate rose pattern that had served countless family dinners through generations of laughter and tears. "Everything else is just beautiful decoration around the only thing that actually matters." Bardo Elsher proved invaluable during these painful weeks, arriving at their penthouse with the enthusiasm of someone determined to transform tragedy into manageable adventure through sheer force of optimistic energy. "I've found a discreet auction house that specializes in estate jewelry," Bardo announced, brandishing business cards with the triumph of someone who had solved particularly challenging puzzles. "They guarantee privacy and premium prices for pieces with documented provenance." "Thank you for helping with this," Solace said gratefully, embracing her dearest friend with the relief of someone discovering she wouldn't have to navigate treacherous waters entirely alone. "I don't know how I would manage everything without your support." "That's what best friends are for," Bardo declared with warm conviction. "Besides, I rather enjoy playing the role of fairy godmother, helping to save Prince Charming's kingdom through clever resource management." Together, they spent long afternoons researching market values, scheduling appointments with buyers, and orchestrating the complex logistics of converting a lifetime's accumulated beauty into liquid assets that could stem the hemorrhaging of Thatcher's business empire. "You're remarkably calm about all this," Bardo observed during one particularly intensive session of cataloguing valuable items for sale. "Most women would be devastated at losing so many precious things." "Things can be replaced," Solace replied philosophically, holding up a sapphire bracelet to catch the afternoon light one final time before placing it in the velvet-lined case destined for tomorrow's auction. "What Thatcher and I have together is irreplaceable." "You truly love him beyond measure, don't you?" Bardo asked with something unreadable flickering in her expression. "Beyond measure, beyond reason, beyond any price that could ever be calculated," Solace confirmed without hesitation. "I would sell my soul if it meant saving our marriage." The mortgage crisis reached its crescendo during a particularly brutal week when foreclosure notices began arriving with the regularity of daily newspapers, each official document representing another countdown to potential homelessness despite their penthouse's luxurious facade. "The bank won't extend our deadline beyond the end of this month," Thatcher reported, after returning from what he diplomatically termed a negotiation session, but which had clearly been a humiliating exercise in begging for mercy from unsympathetic financial institutions. "Then we'll meet their deadline," Solace declared with the confidence of someone who had discovered reserves of strength she never knew existed. "I received the check from the jewelry auction this morning, and the final art pieces sell tomorrow." She had taken additional measures that she hadn't yet shared with Thatcher, obtaining employment with a catering company that specialized in the same high society events she had once attended as guest rather than server. The irony wasn't lost on her. She now worked behind the scenes at galas, similar to the one where she had met her husband, her hands serving champagne to people who had once considered her their social equal. The physical demands of catering work left her exhausted but strangely fulfilled, each paycheck representing tangible contribution to their survival that no inherited jewelry could match. She returned home each evening with aching feet and tired muscles, but also with the satisfaction of someone actively fighting for her marriage rather than passively watching it crumble. "You're working too hard," Thatcher observed one night as he massaged her shoulders with the gentle reverence of someone handling spun glass. "I see how exhausted you are every evening." "I'm working exactly as hard as necessary," Solace replied, leaning into his touch with gratitude for these moments of intimacy that reminded her why every sacrifice felt worthwhile. "And I'm not tired. I'm energized by doing everything possible to save what we've built together." The final mortgage payment represented the culmination of weeks that had transformed them from a wealthy couple into something more valuable. True partners who had learned that love could survive the loss of everything except each other. "We did it," Thatcher whispered, as they held the receipt that proved their home remained safely theirs, his voice carrying wonder as though he couldn't quite believe their narrow escape from financial catastrophe. "We survived," Solace corrected gently, understanding that their victory represented not the end of their trials, but proof of their relationship's ability to weather storms that would have destroyed weaker foundations. As they celebrated with champagne purchased from their corner grocery store rather than imported from French vineyards, neither recognized that their greatest test still lay ahead, that the woman who had helped orchestrate their salvation was simultaneously orchestrating their destruction, and that betrayal often wears the face of friendship until the moment it reveals its true nature with devastating precision. But for tonight, holding each other in their saved home, while autumn rain painted silver patterns on their windows, they allowed themselves to believe that love had conquered all their demons and that their trials had ended rather than simply evolved into something infinitely more painful. Chapter 7. The Ultimate Betrayal. Sometimes the heart shatters so completely that the sound echoes through every room of a home that will never again deserve to be called sanctuary. The key turned in the penthouse lock with the familiar whisper of homecoming that had always filled Solace with warmth and anticipation. But today she moved through the entryway with the excited energy of someone bearing gifts that would transform ordinary evening into celebration. Hidden in her designer purse lay the surprise that had taken weeks to arrange: reservations at the intimate French restaurant where Thatcher had proposed expanding her art therapy dreams, along with a bottle of champagne vintage enough to honor their triumph over financial catastrophe. "Darling, I'm home early," she called toward the study where she expected to find her husband hunched over financial reports, finally allowing himself to breathe after their narrow escape from bankruptcy's clutches. "I have the most wonderful surprise planned for us tonight." Silence greeted her announcement with unusual weight, broken only by sounds drifting from their bedroom that made her pause with growing confusion. Soft laughter, intimate murmurs, the unmistakable rustle of silk against skin, sounds that belonged to her marriage but were occurring during hours when Thatcher should have been alone with his business recovery strategies. Solace set down her purse with hands that had begun trembling without conscious permission, her mind refusing to process the increasingly obvious explanation for what she was hearing. Surely Thatcher was conducting a business call, perhaps with international partners whose time zones demanded unusual meeting schedules. But as she approached their bedroom suite, the sounds grew clearer and more impossible to misinterpret. Whispered endearments in her husband's voice, breathless responses in tones that struck her heart like physical blows because she recognized the voice answering his intimate words. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar, creating a sliver of revelation that would forever divide her life into before and after this moment. Through that cruel gap, Solace witnessed the destruction of everything she had believed sacred, everything she had sacrificed to preserve, everything she had thought worth fighting to save. Thatcher lay entwined with Bardo Elsher in the bed where he and Solace had whispered their dreams and made love with the passion of soulmates who had found their perfect match. But now those same silk sheets wrapped around her husband and her dearest friend, their bodies moving together with the familiarity of lovers who had clearly shared this intimacy many times before. "God, Bardo," Thatcher murmured with reverent hunger as he traced kisses along her throat. "I've needed this so desperately." "I know, darling," Bardo responded with breathless satisfaction, her manicured fingers threading through his hair with possessive confidence. "I've been waiting for the right moment, when we could finally stop pretending." The words struck Solace like physical blows, each syllable driving deeper understanding into her consciousness with surgical precision. This wasn't a moment of weakness or spontaneous passion. This was an established affair, a deliberate deception, a calculated betrayal that had been unfolding while she sold her family treasures to save their marriage. "She still doesn't suspect anything?" Bardo asked with casual cruelty that made Solace's blood freeze in her veins. "Nothing," Thatcher confirmed with satisfaction that transformed his voice into something unrecognizable. "She's been so focused on playing the devoted wife, sacrificing everything to save our sinking ship, that she hasn't noticed I've been finding comfort elsewhere." "Poor innocent Solace," Bardo cooed with mockery disguised as sympathy, working herself to exhaustion while her husband finds solace with someone who actually understands his world. The conversation continued with details that lacerated Solace's heart with each revelation. How long their affair had been progressing, how they had orchestrated opportunities to be together, how they had laughed about her naive devotion while planning their passionate encounters in the very home she had fought so desperately to save. Solace found herself unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to do anything except absorb the complete annihilation of her reality while her legs threatened to buckle beneath the weight of such comprehensive betrayal. When movement finally returned to her frozen limbs, she pushed open the bedroom door with the mechanical precision of someone operating purely on autopilot, stepping into the space where her marriage had just died with all the ceremony of an execution. "How long?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying deadly calm that made both lovers freeze in guilty recognition of their exposure. Thatcher scrambled for the sheet to cover his nakedness, but his attempts at modesty struck Solace as pathetically inadequate after what she had already witnessed. Bardo made no such effort, instead regarding her best friend with defiant challenge that revealed the true extent of her calculated cruelty. "Solace, this isn't what it looks like," Thatcher began with the automatic dishonesty of someone caught in indefensible circumstances. "Really?" Solace replied with bitter precision, "because it looks like my husband is having an affair with my maid of honor in the bed I've been sharing with him throughout our entire marriage." "We never meant for you to find out this way," Bardo offered with false compassion that made Solace's stomach turn with revulsion. "How long?" Solace repeated, her voice growing stronger with righteous fury that was beginning to burn through her initial shock. "Does it matter?" Thatcher asked defensively, as though the duration of their betrayal somehow affected its fundamental wrongness. "It matters to me," Solace said with steel in her voice. "How long have you been lying to my face while I sold everything I owned to save our marriage?" The silence stretched between them like an ocean of guilt, until Bardo answered with casual cruelty that revealed her true nature more clearly than any passionate declaration could have managed. "Since the financial crisis began," she admitted with brazen confidence, "he needed someone who understood his world, someone who could offer comfort without making him feel like a failure." "And I made him feel like a failure?" Solace asked with dangerous quiet. "You made him feel guilty," Bardo clarified with poisonous sweetness. "All that sacrifice, all that devotion, all that determination to save what you called your marriage, it was suffocating him with obligation. While you offered what instead? Solace demanded, though part of her already knew the answer. Freedom, Bardot replied triumphantly. Freedom from guilt, from responsibility, from having to pretend your marriage was worth saving when it had clearly run its course. Thatcher finally found his voice, though it carried none of the authority or conviction she had once found so compelling. Solace, please let me explain. Explain what? She interrupted with fury that had been building like pressure behind a dam finally allowed to burst. Explain how you let me humiliate myself working as a caterer while you were having afternoon liaisons with my best friend. Explain how you accepted my family jewelry to pay your debts while planning to replace me with someone who found your failures exciting rather than heartbreaking. It wasn't planned, Thatcher protested weakly. It just happened during all the stress and uncertainty. Nothing just happens, Solace corrected with bitter wisdom. People make choices, and you chose to betray the woman who was willing to sacrifice everything for you. She moved through their bedroom with methodical precision, gathering the few personal items that still felt authentically hers after so much had been sold to save their sinking financial ship. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had sold her treasures to preserve their marriage, while her husband was actively destroying it through deliberate infidelity. "Where will you go?" Thatcher asked, and she caught something that might have been regret in his voice, though it was far too little and infinitely too late. "Somewhere honest," Solace replied, without looking back at the man who had proven unworthy of everything she had given him. "Somewhere I don't have to question whether the person sharing my bed actually wants to be there." As she reached the penthouse entrance with her single suitcase containing the remnants of her former life, Solace turned back for one final look at the home she had fought so hard to save. "I hope she's worth everything you've lost," she said with quiet dignity that made her betrayal's magnitude clear without descending to their level of cruelty. The elevator doors closed on her marriage with the finality of a coffin lid, carrying her away from the beautiful lie her life had become and toward an uncertain future where at least the loneliness would be honest rather than hidden behind false promises and calculated deceptions. Chapter 8. Fighting for Survival. Rock bottom has a peculiar gift. It provides solid foundation from which the strongest souls learn to rebuild themselves into something more magnificent than they ever imagined possible. The modest apartment that Solace now called home possessed none of the penthouse's luxurious amenities, but as morning sunlight streamed through windows, she had hung with simple cotton curtains. She felt something she hadn't experienced in months, peace that came from living without lies. The second-hand furniture and discount store dinnerware represented honest poverty rather than the gilded deception her marriage had become. Her cell phone's shrill ring interrupted the quiet sanctuary she had been savoring with her morning coffee, but the caller identification made her stomach clench with familiar dread. Slaughter-Dean, attorney at law, appeared on her screen with the regularity of a malevolent digital stalker, each call bringing fresh threats disguised as legal communications. "Mrs. Savage," the voice oozed false politeness that barely concealed predatory anticipation. "I trust you received our latest correspondence regarding your husband's outstanding debts." "It's Ms. Raven now," Solace corrected with dignity she had learned to wield like armor against those who sought to diminish her. "And I've told you repeatedly that I'm not responsible for debts I neither incurred nor authorized. Marriage creates joint liability in many financial situations," Slaughter-Dean continued, with the satisfaction of someone explaining inevitable doom to condemned prisoners. "Your signature appears on several documents that make you equally responsible for amounts totaling just over $2 million. The number struck her like a physical blow, though she had suspected the magnitude of Thatcher's financial catastrophe extended far beyond what he had revealed during their increasingly distant final months together. $2 million represented more than she could earn in several lifetimes, even if she worked every available hour at jobs that paid living wages rather than survival rations. "I never signed documents authorizing such debts," Solace protested, though her voice lacked the conviction she wished she could summon. "Perhaps you should review your signature more carefully," Dean suggested with malicious amusement that made her skin crawl. Forgery allegations would require proving intent to deceive, which becomes complicated when wives sign documents their husbands present during normal domestic routines. The implication sent cold terror down Solace's spine as she realized Thatcher must have obtained her signature on financial documents by disguising them as routine household paperwork, insurance forms, property deeds, investment authorizations that she had signed trustingly while focused on their domestic happiness rather than legal implications. "What exactly are you demanding?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would reshape her precarious new life in ways she wasn't prepared to handle. "Full payment within 30 days, or we begin asset seizure procedures," Dean announced with bureaucratic cruelty that reminded her why she had lost faith in the legal system's capacity for compassion. "Your current wages will be garnished, your bank accounts frozen, and any valuable possessions liquidated to satisfy outstanding obligations." After disconnecting the call that felt like a death sentence delivered through modern technology, Solace sat in her small kitchen surrounded by the humble possessions she had accumulated since leaving her marriage, understanding that even this modest sanctuary could be stripped away by legal mechanisms she didn't understand but couldn't escape. The business card lay crumpled in her purse, where she had carried it for weeks, without finding courage to make the call that might represent her only hope of survival. Atlas Hammer, attorney at law, had been recommended by the social worker at her art therapy center, someone who understood that good people sometimes needed protection from systems designed to benefit those with power rather than those seeking justice. "Mr. Hammer's office," answered a warm voice that carried none of the predatory anticipation she had learned to expect from legal professionals. "I'd like to schedule a consultation regarding debt collection harassment," Solace said, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded when discussing circumstances that threatened to destroy her carefully rebuilt stability. "Can you come in this afternoon?" the receptionist asked with efficiency tempered by genuine concern. "Mr. Hammer often takes cases involving financial abuse, and he'll want to review your situation as quickly as possible." The law office occupied the third floor of a restored brownstone in a neighborhood that balanced professional dignity with accessibility, expensive enough to inspire confidence, affordable enough to suggest attorneys who remembered their obligation to serve justice rather than merely accumulate wealth. Solace climbed the stairs with nervous energy that combined hope with terror of discovering that even legal representation might prove beyond her financial reach. The waiting room reflected thoughtful design choices that prioritized comfort over intimidation. Soft leather chairs arranged around coffee tables displaying legal journals alongside current magazines, artwork that celebrated justice rather than wealth, and windows that filled the space with natural light rather than harsh fluorescent glare that made vulnerable people feel like specimens under microscopes. Atlas Hammer stood as she entered his office, and Solace found herself momentarily startled by his unexpected presence. Where she had anticipated another Slaughter Dean, polished predator in expensive suits, she discovered a man whose strength seemed rooted in principle rather than profit. His handshake conveyed warmth and competence, while his eyes held the kindness of someone who genuinely cared about the people seeking his protection. The office itself reflected his character. Law books that showed actual use rather than decorative display, diplomas hung with pride but not arrogance, photographs showing him volunteering at legal aid clinics rather than posing with wealthy clients. Everything about the space suggested a lawyer who had chosen service over status, justice over profit margins. "Please, sit down and tell me what's happening," he invited, gesturing toward comfortable chairs arranged more like a consultation than an interrogation. I understand you're facing some challenging legal circumstances. As Solace recounted her story, the fairy tale marriage, the financial crisis, her sacrificial attempts to save their home, the devastating betrayal, and now the legal threats that followed her into her new life like malevolent shadows, Atlas listened with attention that reminded her how rare genuine interest had become in her recent experience. His questions demonstrated not just professional competence, but personal investment in her well-being. He took detailed notes, asked for clarification on timeline details, and occasionally paused to explain legal concepts in language she could understand, rather than hiding behind technical jargon that would have left her feeling more confused and powerless. "Your husband forged your signature on financial documents?" Atlas asked, his voice carrying controlled anger that seemed directed at Thatcher rather than skepticism about her claims. "I believe so," Solace admitted. "I remember signing papers he said were insurance updates or property maintenance authorizations, but I never knowingly agreed to personal liability for business debts." "That's fraud," Atlas stated with conviction that made her heart leap with unexpected hope. "If we can prove he misrepresented the nature of documents you signed, we can challenge your liability for those debts entirely." "But can you prove it?" Solace asked, afraid to believe that legal solutions might exist for problems that had seemed insurmountable. "We'll subpoena the original documents, compare signatures, examine the circumstances under which they were obtained," Atlas explained with the confidence of someone who had fought similar battles before. "More importantly, we'll demonstrate that you received no benefit from these debts and had no knowledge of their true purpose." His detailed explanation of their legal strategy revealed both technical expertise and strategic thinking that impressed her with its thoroughness. He outlined potential challenges they might face, explained the timeline for various legal procedures, and prepared her for the emotional demands of litigation without sugarcoating the difficulties ahead. "I can't afford extensive legal representation," Solace confessed with embarrassment that burned her cheeks. "I'm working as a catering assistant just to pay rent on a studio apartment." "This kind of case often qualifies for contingency representation," Atlas replied gently. "I only collect fees if we win your case, and then only from whatever settlement or judgment we obtain." The offer seemed too generous to be genuine, prompting Solace to study his face for signs of the deception she had learned to expect from men who made promises that sounded too good to be true. "Why would you take such a risk?" she asked directly. "Because I became a lawyer to protect people from exactly this kind of abuse," Atlas answered with simplicity that carried more conviction than elaborate legal arguments. "Your husband used your trust and your marriage to defraud you, then abandoned you to face consequences for his crimes. That's not just legally wrong, it's morally reprehensible." Over the following weeks, as Atlas built their case with methodical precision, Solace discovered what competent legal representation felt like when provided by someone who viewed her as a person rather than a profit opportunity. He explained each development in language she could understand, returned her calls promptly, and treated her concerns with respect that reminded her of her own worth. Their meetings became islands of hope in an ocean of uncertainty, professional consultations that somehow felt like conversations with someone who genuinely cared about her well-being beyond the legal outcome. Atlas possessed the rare ability to balance emotional support with practical strategy, offering comfort when she felt overwhelmed while maintaining the focus necessary to build their strongest possible case. "The document analysis came back," Atlas announced during one of their regular meetings, his expression carrying satisfaction that made her pulse quicken with anticipation. 3 different handwriting experts confirm that your signatures were traced or forged on the most significant debt authorizations." "What does that mean for my case?" Solace asked, hardly daring to hope for complete vindication. "It means we have grounds to challenge every debt they've attributed to you. Atlas replied, with the confidence of someone who had just been handed the keys to victory. It also means your ex-husband may face criminal charges for fraud and forgery. The news felt surreal after months of believing herself trapped in legal quicksand with no possibility of escape. Atlas's steady competence had transformed her from victim to victor, his expertise providing the weapon she needed to fight battles she couldn't have won alone. As they worked together toward her legal salvation, Solace began noticing qualities in Atlas that transcended professional competence. His genuine concern for her well-being, his anger at injustices she had suffered, his determination to restore not just her financial freedom, but her faith in human decency. "You've given me something I never expected to find again," she said quietly during one of their final preparation meetings before the trial. "What's that?" Atlas asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected her answer. "Hope," she replied simply. "You've reminded me that there are still people in this world who fight for what's right rather than what's profitable." "Thank me when we win," Atlas replied. But his smile suggested their partnership had already given him something valuable in return. The opportunity to use his skills in service of someone who truly deserved protection, someone whose courage had inspired him to be the lawyer he had always intended to become. Chapter 9. The Final Battle. Justice wears no crown and carries no scepter, yet when she finally arrives in courtrooms where truth battles deception, her presence transforms ordinary proceedings into sacred theater where souls are weighed against evidence of their choices. The courthouse steps seem to stretch endlessly upward like a marble stairway to judgment itself, each footfall echoing with the weight of everything Solace had lost and everything she hoped to reclaim through legal vindication. Atlas walked beside her with steady confidence that reminded her why she had learned to trust his guidance through the labyrinthine complexities of civil litigation, his presence offering strength when her own courage threatened to falter. "Remember what we discussed," Atlas murmured as they approached the imposing bronze doors that would soon open onto the arena where her future would be determined. "Answer only what's asked, speak clearly, and trust that the evidence supports everything you're going to say." Inside the courtroom, Solace felt the familiar sensation of entering a world governed by rules she didn't fully understand but must navigate successfully to reclaim her freedom from debts she had never knowingly incurred. The mahogany paneling and leather-bound legal volumes created an atmosphere of gravitas that reminded everyone present that serious matters would be decided within these walls. The gallery filled slowly with spectators drawn by the drama of a high-profile financial case, journalists with notebooks ready to capture every damaging revelation, legal professionals eager to witness Atlas Hammer's courtroom skills, and curious members of the public who had followed the story through media coverage. Each face represented someone who would judge her credibility, her character, her worthiness for legal protection. Slaughter Dean sat at the plaintiff's table with the smug confidence of someone who believed victory was predetermined by superior resources and legal technicalities. His expensive suit and gold watch caught the light from tall windows, creating an image of success that masked the predatory nature of his profession. Beside him sat representatives from various creditors, their faces reflecting the cold calculations of businesses seeking to extract maximum profit from human misery. But what made Solace's breath catch in her throat was the sight of Thatcher entering the courtroom with Bardo Elsher clinging to his arm like an elegant parasite, feeding off his diminished but still considerable wealth. He looked older, more haggard, his once confident bearing replaced by the nervous energy of someone who had learned that consequences eventually arrive to collect debts that go beyond money. Bardo had dressed for the occasion in a way that seemed calculated to emphasize the contrast between her polished sophistication and Solace's more modest appearance. Her designer suit and expensive jewelry sent a clear message about which woman belonged in Thatcher's wealthy world, which woman was worthy of his affections. The sight of her grandmother's emerald necklace, sold during the financial crisis, now adorning Bardot's throat, struck Solace like a physical blow. "Don't look at them," Atlas advised quietly, his hand briefly touching her shoulder with reassuring warmth. "Focus on why we're here and what we're fighting to achieve." Judge Ventura Cash entered with the dignity befitting someone tasked with weighing evidence and dispensing justice according to laws that protected both the innocent and the guilty, depending on whose attorney presented the more convincing arguments. Her silver hair and penetrating gaze suggested someone who had presided over enough human dramas to recognize truth when it finally decided to make an appearance. The courtroom's atmosphere grew tense as preliminary motions were heard and procedural matters settled. Atlas had warned Solace that these technical discussions might seem boring, but were crucial to establishing the legal framework within which her case would be decided. She watched him navigate objections and counter-motions with the skill of someone who understood that justice often turned on seemingly minor procedural victories. In the matter of multiple creditors versus Solace Raven, Judge Cash announced, her voice carrying authority that instantly commanded attention from everyone present. "We are here to determine the defendant's liability for debts allegedly incurred during her marriage to Thatcher Savage." Slaughter Dean rose with theatrical flourish, his opening statement painting Solace as a woman who had enjoyed the benefits of her husband's business ventures and therefore bore equal responsibility for their financial consequences. His words twisted her sacrifices into evidence of guilt, her devotion into proof of complicity, her innocence into calculated deception. Mrs. Raven lived in luxury, purchased with borrowed money, Dean declared with righteous indignation that rang hollow to anyone who knew the true circumstances. She wore jewelry bought on credit, lived in homes mortgaged beyond their value, and participated in a lifestyle that required extensive debt financing. She cannot now claim ignorance of obligations that funded her privileged existence. His presentation was masterful in its manipulation of facts, taking elements of truth and twisting them into a narrative that portrayed Solace as a willing participant in financial fraud rather than its innocent victim. He produced photographs of their penthouse, their Caribbean island, her expensive gowns at charity events, all evidence of a lifestyle that seemed inconsistent with claims of financial ignorance. When Atlas stood to present their defense, his presence seemed to fill the courtroom with different energy, not the aggressive posturing that characterized so many legal proceedings, but the quiet strength of someone confident in his ability to reveal truth through careful presentation of facts rather than emotional manipulation. "Your Honor," Atlas began with respectful authority, "the evidence will show that Ms. Raven was not a willing participant in her husband's financial schemes, but rather their most innocent victim. She sacrificed her personal inheritance, her family treasures, even her physical comfort working multiple jobs to save a marriage that was being destroyed by the very man now seeking to escape responsibility for his crimes." The testimony unfolded like a dramatic revelation of human nature's capacity for both nobility and betrayal. Expert witnesses confirmed that Solace's signatures on crucial debt documents had been forged or obtained through fraudulent misrepresentation. Bank records showed that she had never personally benefited from the loans now threatening her financial future, while mortgage payments and living expenses had been covered by the sale of her legitimate assets. A handwriting expert took the stand with magnified copies of signature samples, pointing out inconsistencies that were invisible to untrained eyes but clearly indicated forgery to someone with professional expertise. The testimony was technical but damning, establishing beyond reasonable doubt that Solace's signature had been duplicated without her knowledge or consent on documents that created millions of dollars in personal liability. "Ms. Raven," Atlas said gently when she took the witness stand, his voice carrying encouragement that helped steady her nerves, "please tell the court how you learned about your husband's financial difficulties." He was distant, stressed, Working late into the night, Solace replied, her voice growing stronger as she recounted the painful memories. When I pressed him for information, he admitted they were facing bankruptcy, but assured me it was temporary. What did you do with this information? I began selling everything I owned, she said simply, the words carrying more power than elaborate explanations. My grandmother's jewelry, my art collection, furniture that had been in my family for generations. I took employment as a catering assistant to help with household expenses. Her testimony painted a picture of devotion and sacrifice that struck even the most cynical observers as genuine. She spoke of working 12-hour days at catering events, of selling family heirlooms that had been intended for future generations, of believing that her marriage was worth any sacrifice required to preserve it. Were you aware that your husband was accumulating additional debts during this period? Atlas continued, his questions designed to establish her complete ignorance of the fraudulent transactions. No, Solace answered with conviction that resonated throughout the courtroom. I believed we were fighting together to save our marriage and our home. I had no idea he was creating new financial obligations while I was sacrificing everything to pay existing ones. Did your husband ever ask you to sign documents related to these business debts? He presented papers he said were insurance updates and property maintenance authorizations, Solace replied with quiet dignity. I signed them because I trusted my husband to tell me the truth about what I was signing. When Slaughter Dean cross-examined her, his questions grew increasingly aggressive as he failed to find inconsistencies in her testimony or evidence of the complicity his case required for success. His attacks on her character and motivations only served to make her appear more sympathetic to the jury, more clearly the victim of elaborate deception. Isn't it true that you signed documents your husband presented to you without reading them carefully? Dean demanded with accusatory intensity. I signed papers he told me were insurance updates and property maintenance authorizations, Solace replied with dignity intact. I trusted my husband to tell me the truth about what I was signing. That trust was misplaced, wasn't it? Yes, she admitted with quiet sadness. It was catastrophically misplaced. The most dramatic moment came when Thatcher himself took the witness stand, his testimony revealing a man wrestling with guilt and self-justification in equal measure. Under Atlas's skillful questioning, he admitted to obtaining Solace's signature through deception, acknowledged her financial sacrifices to save their marriage, and confessed that she had never knowingly agreed to personal liability for his business debts. You forged your wife's signature on financial documents totaling over $2 million, Atlas stated with controlled precision, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom like an indictment from a higher power. I misrepresented the nature of what she was signing, Thatcher replied weakly, his attempts at legal euphemism failing to disguise the magnitude of his betrayal. You committed fraud against your own wife while she was sacrificing her inheritance to save your marriage, Atlas pressed, his anger barely contained within professional boundaries. Yes, Thatcher whispered, tears beginning to stream down his face as shame finally overcame his attempts at self-preservation. You allowed your wife to sell her family treasures while you were having an affair with her maid of honor, Atlas stated with controlled fury that made several jurors visibly react with disgust. I never intended for things to happen that way, Thatcher replied weakly, his voice barely audible as shame consumed his remaining composure. But they did happen that way, didn't they, Mr. Savage? While Ms. Raven worked multiple jobs to save your marriage, you were destroying it through deliberate infidelity. Yes, Thatcher whispered, his admission carrying the weight of complete moral collapse. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Bardo Elsher's presence in the courtroom as Thatcher's new companion provided a visual reminder of the betrayals that had accompanied his financial crimes, her expensive clothing and jewelry contrasting sharply with Solace's modest dress and determined dignity. When spectators noticed Solace's former emerald necklace adorning Bardo's throat, audible murmurs of disapproval rippled through the gallery. The final witnesses included social workers from Solace's art therapy center, testifying about her character and dedication to helping children heal through creative expression. Their testimony painted a picture of someone whose entire life was devoted to service and healing, making the accusations against her seem even more implausible. As closing arguments concluded and Judge Cash announced an overnight recess to consider the verdict, tension filled the courtroom like electricity before a thunderstorm. Everything Solace had fought for hung in the balance: her freedom from debt, her ability to rebuild her life, her faith in justice's capacity to protect the innocent from the consequences of others' crimes. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Atlas said as they stood on the courthouse steps while autumn wind scattered leaves like scattered dreams around their feet, "you've already proven your strength and dignity. You've shown everyone in that courtroom what integrity looks like under pressure." "I couldn't have done this without you," Solace replied, meaning far more than legal representation in her words of gratitude. "Yes, you could have," Atlas corrected gently, his eyes holding admiration that went beyond professional appreciation. "You already had everything necessary to fight this battle. I just helped you understand how to use weapons you already possessed." As they parted ways for what might be their final evening before the verdict determined her fate, neither spoke of the connection that had grown between them during weeks of working together toward justice, though both recognized that tomorrow would bring changes that extended far beyond legal victory or defeat. Chapter 10. Love's True Victory. Morning light streaming through courtroom windows carried the promise that some battles end not just with victory, but with the kind of triumph that transforms wounded souls into something more beautiful than they ever imagined possible. Judge Ventura Cash entered with documents that would either vindicate Solace's faith in justice or condemn her to financial servitude for crimes she had never committed. The courtroom held its collective breath as she settled behind her bench with gravity of someone about to pronounce judgment that would reshape multiple lives with carefully chosen words. "After careful consideration of all evidence presented," Judge Cash began, her voice carrying the weight of legal authority tempered by human compassion, "this court finds the defendant, Solace Raven, bears no liability for debts incurred through fraudulent misrepresentation of document contents and forged signatures." Relief flooded through Solace with such intensity that her knees threatened to buckle, only Atlas's steadying hand on her arm keeping her upright as the verdict's implications crashed over her like a tsunami of vindication. Free. She was finally, legally, completely free from the financial chains that had threatened to drag her into poverty as punishment for loving too deeply and trusting too completely. Furthermore, Judge Cash continued with satisfaction that suggested her own approval of the verdict, "This court recommends that the District Attorney's Office investigate possible criminal charges against Thatcher Savage for fraud, forgery, and financial abuse." The courtroom erupted in murmurs of approval from spectators who had followed the case and recognized justice when it finally made its long-awaited appearance. Slaughter Dean gathered his papers with the bitter efficiency of someone accustomed to winning through intimidation rather than merit, his defeat serving as reminder that truth occasionally triumphs over expensive legal maneuvering. But Solace's attention focused on Thatcher, who sat at the opposing table with tears streaming down his face as the full magnitude of his losses became undeniably clear. He had sacrificed a woman who loved him unconditionally for an affair that had provided temporary pleasure, but permanent regret. Bardo Elsher sat beside him with growing discomfort as she realized her association with a man facing potential criminal charges might prove less glamorous than she had anticipated. "Congratulations," Atlas said softly, his professional satisfaction mixing with personal joy that made his eyes shine with warmth that transcended attorney-client relationships. You're free from all of it. The debts, the harassment, the fear of losing everything you've worked to rebuild. I don't know how to thank you, Solace replied through tears of relief and gratitude that had been building pressure behind carefully maintained composure for months of legal uncertainty. There is something you could do, Atlas said with sudden nervousness that replaced his courtroom confidence with endearing vulnerability. Before she could ask what he meant, Atlas moved with decisive grace that took her breath away. In the middle of the courtroom, where her legal victory had just been announced, with dozens of witnesses including her former husband and his mistress watching in stunned amazement, Atlas dropped to one knee on the polished marble floor. "Solace Raven," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent courtroom with words that made her heart stop beating for several eternal seconds. "I've watched you face impossible challenges with dignity that inspired me to be a better lawyer and a better man." From his pocket, he produced a simple but beautiful ring, not the ostentatious display of wealth that might have been expected, but a classic solitaire that spoke of timeless elegance and sincere devotion rather than financial power. "I've fallen in love with your courage, your kindness, your refusal to become bitter despite betrayals that would have destroyed weaker spirits," Atlas continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend my life proving that some men are worthy of the trust you're brave enough to offer?" The proposal struck the courtroom like lightning, transforming a legal proceeding into something far more profound, a demonstration that love could indeed triumph over betrayal, that second chances existed for those courageous enough to risk their hearts again after devastating disappointment. "Yes," Solace whispered, then louder with joy that filled every corner of the room. "Yes, yes, yes." As Atlas slipped the ring onto her finger with reverent care, the courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause from strangers who recognized they were witnessing something remarkable. Not just legal victory, but the triumph of hope over despair, love over betrayal, faith over cynicism. Thatcher's sobs grew louder as he watched the woman he had thrown away accept a proposal from a man who clearly understood her worth. Bardot shifted uncomfortably in her seat, perhaps realizing for the first time that her victory in stealing another woman's husband had ultimately cost her the respect of everyone present, including the man she had won through deception. Judge Cash smiled from her bench with the satisfaction of someone who had presided over genuine justice rather than mere legal technicality. "Court is adjourned," she announced, "and may I offer congratulations to the happy couple." As Atlas helped Solace to her feet, both of them radiant with the joy of victory and new love, they turned to leave the courtroom that had witnessed not just legal vindication, but the beginning of a love story built on mutual respect rather than financial attraction. Behind them, Thatcher remained alone in his seat, crying as he finally understood the magnitude of what he had lost through his selfishness and betrayal. Bardot sat beside him but offered no comfort, her own discomfort suggesting she was already calculating her exit strategy from an association that no longer provided the social status she had sought. But Solace heard none of his tears, saw none of his regret. She walked through the courthouse halls with Atlas by her side, her laughter echoing off marble walls like music celebrating the most beautiful kind of victory, not just winning a legal battle, but finding a love worthy of her magnificent heart. The sound of her joy filled the corridor with such pure happiness that even strangers smiled to hear it, recognizing the laughter of someone who had survived betrayal and discovered that some stories truly do end with the right person finding their way home to love that will last forever. The end